Hello, and welcome to Chapter 10, Interest Groups and Lobbying from the American Government Textbook, 3rd edition from Open Stax. So, in a last chapter, we were talking about political parties, and we did have a mention about interest groups in there, and of course, the difference between interest groups and political parties. So, in this chapter, we're specifically focused now on interest groups and what they do and their influence that they have in politics and politicians. So interest groups play a fundamental role in representing individuals or corporate interests and the public before the government. So there is mostly any interest groups you can think of. There is an interest group out there for whatever, if it's an interest, whether it's animals, whether it's for a particular industry, whatever it may be, there is an interest group out there. And what they try to do is influence and make sure that whether a current piece of legislation is in their favor or if it's against their favor, to make sure it doesn't become law. And if it is a law, to make sure that maybe they can play an influence in the judicial system to make sure it becomes unconstitutional if they don't favor that particular legislation. Of course, they also help inform the public and lawmakers about issues, and of course try to promote policies that benefit their interests, as I just mentioned. They interact with all branches, right, government at the local, state, and federal level. So interest groups, again, interest groups do not function primarily to elect candidates under a party label, although some interest groups are more in line with a political party. However, and of course, they don't directly control the operations of government. What they try to do is influence the politicians, influence parties, and they are issue specific. Right, and often sometimes they may cross party lines, but most of the time interest groups have some form of alignment with political parties because of the issues. So you can see here the National Rifle Association to the top left, and of course you also see issues March for Our Lives here. And of course you can see other organizations try to whether they are for gun rights or they try to do some gun control reform. Interest group, of course, is any formal association of individuals or organizations, again, that tries to influence government decision making at the public and making a public policy. Now, within an interest group, there's an individual called the lobbyist, and that is an influence, right? An influencer, not a social media influencer, but an influencer in politics. Of course, that represents the interest group before government. Interest groups may take the form of membership organizations that individuals join voluntarily in which they pay dues. And of course, interest groups may form to represent companies, corporate organizations, and governments. And of course, you have to, of course, some organizations actually employ in-house lobbyists and retain contract lobbyists, so they hire individuals to go in their favor. So of course, again, in order to be a lobbyist, you have to register with the state and make sure you comply with all rules and regulations. So of course, you can see here the Sierra Club is a very well-known interest group, and of course, state them mostly with the climate and of course the environment. The healthcare is an important concern of the American Association of Retired People. The AARP is a very, very strong both state and national lobbying organization for individuals who are near retirement or retired. You can see here most, again, Amazon workers. You can see here, of course, interest groups trying to help influence individuals to be part of their interest group, or their interest group is trying to influence policy. Public versus private interest groups. Private interest groups usually seek particular benefits from government that favor either single interest or a narrow set of interests. Of course, public interest groups promote public or collective goods that benefits almost all citizens. So you can see here George Floyd. Protests take to the streets. So interest groups most take to the streets and show their interest. Try to influence by having protests. Collective action. So within an interest group, that means all members do the necessary work to keep the group funded and operating. So they go out and fundraise money from individuals or whether it's online. They also may even, some of them, of course, have membership dues that are required to be part of the member. So that's another fun way to fundraise money. Of course, political action, collective action problems exist when people have this initiative to take action, and of course to have other people do the work for them. Those, of course, not taking action are called free riders. And what free riders is really is the individuals out there marching and trying to make things happen and being part of the interest group, making phone calls, visiting individuals at the federal level or state level, elected officials. They're out there actually working to get things done. And the free rider is the one just sitting back and not doing much, but benefiting from the resources and the action that the particular interest group would do. So, for example, if I was all about the environment, and I wanted to, help the environment stay clean and about climate change, and of course, Sierra Group, one a very known interest group, does that, and I never helped Sierra Club do anything. I never participate. I never pay my dues to be part of a member. I never go knock on doors or talk to congressional officials on behalf of the Sierra Club. And of course, and I don't do any of it. I'm just sitting back and being a free rider and benefiting off the backs of those people who are actually doing something about it. So, of course, what are some ways to overcome collective action problems that I just mentioned? So review that question, think about it amongst yourselves. So, of course, the Occupy Wall Street movement, of course, back in 2009 was another way to influence. And, of course, we see here even social issues as well. Overcoming collective action problems, right? So obtaining financial support, offering incentives, hiring a lobbyist. So these are just ways to kind of overcome those collective action problems that I mentioned. Interest groups and political parties. Interest groups offer or encourage voting, campaigning. Of course, some of them develop grassroots movements, and of course frame issues that benefit their causes. And of course, they try to, again, get issues on the government agenda. So recent changes to U.S. interest groups. There have been some recent changes to interest groups. There, of course, the number of interest groups that represent the public as opposed to economic interest has significantly grown over the years. The last few decades have shown an increase in professionalization lobbying. And of course, different techniques as well to get people. Social media has been a major impact as well amongst interest groups. So now, now there's not only can you go out and march in person, but also you can help lobby individuals through social media, raise awareness, create hashtags that create awareness to a particular issue. So you can see here some benefit, business sector that donations, total donations to parties and candidates. Of course, you can see here to the left, the dollar amounts contributed to political actions committee. Of course, the money that goes into it, organizations, because they have particular interest. Lower socioeconomic status. So citizens with lower socioeconomic status are not well represented amongst interest groups. Several of the reasons why is that because people who don't have enough economic, don't have enough money, they can't contribute, right? Or they can't participate in these groups because they're busy working. They may like the free time to participate. And of course, sometimes financial barriers make them not able to participate. So of course, these interest groups, they may have, in order to become a full-blown member and attend meetings, you will need to pay, your dues, your membership dues. And of course, some people from lower socioeconomic status cannot pay those dues, may perhaps not be able to pay that. The poor may not have enough reason to believe that they can and make a difference. Interest groups support candidates who are sympathetic to their views. Some interest groups form political action committees. Of course, those political action committees collect funds from donors and, of course, distribute to a particular candidate who support their issues. Now, here's the difference between the interest group and political action committees. Interest groups, you can form yourself because of the issues that, of course, align with you. And, of course, you pay your dues. And of course, you continue to lobby congressional officials or other elected officials. Now, here comes the difference between a political action committee. If you want to directly donate money to a particular candidate because your interest groups aligned with that politician's ideas, then of course that interest groups has to form a political action committee, because we have to make sure that we're meeting the regulations. And that political action committee formed from the funds collected from donors, they can distribute it to the candidate or candidates who support their particular issues. So you can see here the political action committees, powerful ones who have given money. So whether it's a corporation or a particular interest group, like the National Beer Wholesalers Association, that's an organization. And of course they formed a political action committee to donate money to make sure that the laws and regulations are in their favor. Interest groups influencing governance, right? Lawmakers rely on interest groups and lobbyists to provide them with information and to also make sure that they help them get elected. These voting cues give lawmakers an indication of how they're doing, and of course to make sure that they're aligning with the voters' issues in their districts, so make sure they get reelected. And of course, interest groups target members of relevant committees. Interest groups influence governance also processed by targeting lawmakers when legislation is on the floor, trying to defeat legislation. Of course, there may be judgmental views. So, for example, the National Rifle Association, if there's a particular legislation on the floor, whether at the state or federal level, that does not favor their organization, they're going to try everything to make sure that that piece of legislation does not become law if it doesn't favor them. Or if it does favor them, make sure that it does become law. So, of course, there is also targeting of the judicial branches. So, interest groups actually try to also influence the judicial branches, the judges. Of course, judicial judges at the federal level are not elected. Also at the state level, in some particular states, they're not elected. So, of course, interest groups try to influence at the federal level by making sure, they influence the politicians by making sure, hey, when there is a federal judge opening, make sure that you put a judge that meets, that goes through, that has similar viewpoints as a particular interest group. So they also influence the judges. So how do interest groups lobby the judicial branch? So from your readings, think about it and see, how do interest groups lobby the judicial branch? So what interest groups can and cannot do? So of course there are rules and regulations for interest groups. They just can't do everything. The 1995 Lobbying Disclosure Act defined who can and cannot lobby, and of course requires lobbyists and interest groups to register with the federal government. The Honest Leadership and Open Government Act of 2007 further increased restrictions on lobbying. And of course, federal and state governments prohibit certain activists, such as providing gifts and compensations, and governments require disclosure about the amount of money spent on lobbying efforts. So interest groups contributing freedom of speech. It is generally agreed that interest groups have a right under the Constitution. And of course, the extent of this protected right is not agreed upon. So of course, do interest groups have freedom of speech? And that is it for Chapter 10 of Interest Groups from the American Government Textbook, 3rd edition from Open Stax. Thank you.